Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. I am Diksha from the Zoho Books team, and I'll be hosting today's webinar on Vendor Portal. If you have any queries during the webinar, please drop your questions in the questions tab, and our product experts will have those answered for you. So, without any further delay, let's get started. Let us first have a look at the agenda. First, we'll see what is Vendor Portal and why it is important. Then we'll get straight into the product and show you how to set up preferences, how to enable the portal for your vendors, and then we'll give you a detailed demo on how things work inside the vendor portal and Zoho Books. After this, we'll have a live question and answer session where you can drop all your questions regarding the vendor portal in the questions tab. So, now let's quickly dive into the first section of today's agenda, which is what is vendor portal and why do we require it. A vendor portal is a dedicated space for your vendors where they can manage all their transactions, credits, and payment details. But why do we need a vendor portal when the same task can be done through emails and a couple of calls? Working and collaborating with vendors using these modes of communication can be challenging. As your business grows, it might be difficult to manage all your orders, keep track of each transaction, collaborate and maintain vendor relationships. Emails may not be the best method to communicate with your vendors. Your vendor might be handling multiple clients and may lose transactions related to your business in the sea of emails. Since there is no communication with your vendor, there will be a lack of visibility on the status of transactions, discounts, and delivery of goods and services. To get the information regarding transactions and deliveries, you end up calling your vendor multiple times, which is, as we all know, a time-consuming and tedious task and may also disrupt relations between you and your vendors. The whole process ultimately affects the supply of goods and services into your organization that can slow down your business and can in turn affect your cash flow. Due to all these problems faced by our customers, we have introduced a dedicated portal for your vendors. Vendor Portal allows you to communicate and collaborate with your vendor on a real-time basis. In-app notifications keeps you updated on the vendor activities. For example, when your vendor views your purchase order or makes a comment on a transaction, an in-app notification inside the Zoho Books will be automatically triggered. Your vendor can view and comment on all the transactions related to your business from a single space. They can track payments and generate a consolidated statement of account from a single space. This provides visibility to both you and your vendors. With this increased communication, there will be a clarity on operations. So now, you need not follow up with your vendors on details regarding transactions, which in turn saves your time and money. With Vendor Portal, your vendors can also upload a picture or a PDF of transactions and documents directly. They can also sort out transactions based on status like paid, overdue, billed, partially paid, etc. With everything organized, you can stay updated on the deliveries of goods and services from your vendor and in turn commit the right quantity and timeline to your customers. This will help you streamline your accounts payable as well as your accounts receivables, which in turn streamlines your cash flow. Now that we know the advantages of using a vendor portal, let's get into the next section, which is the product demonstration. Under this section, we are first going to log into Zoho Books account and set up the preferences. To do this, go to Settings, Preferences, and Portals. Navigate to the Vendor Portal tab. In the first section of the screen, you will see the details such as the portal name and the portal URL. The portal name is unique to your organization and it is used in the URL of the client and vendor portal. This is auto-generated by default. However, you can edit the portal name and click Save if you want to customize it. From the next section of the screen, you can configure the notifications and the access preferences. Enabling this option notifies you via emails and in-app notification whenever your vendor uploads documents, adds comments, or updates any details. If you enable this option, then you can notify your vendor via an email whenever you add a comment or reject the document that they have uploaded. Enabling this option allows your vendors to edit their shipping or billing addresses, custom fields, and other contact details in case of any changes. If you enable this option, then you can allow vendors to upload PDFs or images of transaction that support your purchase. You can view the document and accept it to create a bill in Zoho Books. To showcase the full functionality of Vendor Portal, I'll be enabling all these options. Depending on your requirement, you can either enable and disable any of these options. The final section under the preference is the banner message. The banner message will be displayed in the home screen of the Vendor Portal. You can also use the banner message to inform your vendor about any important announcements. Once this is done, click on Save. We have now successfully set up the preferences for the Vendor Portal. Let us now move on to the next section, which is enabling the Vendor Portal for the vendors. In Zoho Books, you can enable the Vendor Portal for your vendor and also for the vendor's contact person. To enable the Vendor Portal for your existing vendors, go to Purchases, Vendors. Select the vendor for whom you want to enable the portal. Now, click on the More drop-down and select Configure Vendor Portal. A pop-up box will appear with the vendor and the contact person's details. Click on the checkbox to select the vendor and the contact person. On the right side of the screen, you will have an option to set the portal password for your vendor. If you have set up a password for your vendor while enabling the portal access, an invitation email along with the password will be sent to the vendor. Once the vendor has used the credentials to log into the vendor portal, your vendor will be directed to the new password creation page where he or she can set up a new password for the vendor portal. If the password field is left blank, auto-generated link will be sent to create the password. If you are creating a new vendor, in that case, you can enable the vendor portal by checking this box. You can also set the vendor portal language from this section. Now that we have enabled the vendor portal for our vendors, as well as for our vendor's contact person, the next step is to access the vendor portal. However, before we do so, let us see the transactions that you can share with your vendors and how they are reflected inside the vendor portal. The purchase order created in Zoho Books will be reflected as a purchase order in the vendor portal. The bill that is created in the Zoho Books organization will be reflected as an invoice in the vendor portal. The vendor credits, that is, the amount that your vendor owes you, that is added in your Zoho Books organization, will be reflected as a credit in vendor portal. Now that we are clear on how the transactions created in Zoho Books are reflected inside the vendor portal, let us go ahead and see how the vendor portal looks like. As soon as your vendor logs into the vendor portal, he or she will be greeted with a banner message. On the next section of the screen, the vendor can view the outstanding invoice amount and the available credits. Your vendor can view the last payment that they received from you in this section. If you have enabled the option, Allow vendor to upload documents under the preference section, then the status of the uploaded documents can be viewed from over here. In the next section, the vendor can view his or her contact details, GST details, and billing and shipping address. If you have enabled Allow vendor to update their contact details in the portal under the preference section, then the vendor can edit their contact details, GST details, and billing and shipping address and update them from the vendor portal itself. Your vendor can view your organization detail from this section. Vendors can also send you emails from within the vendor portal. Please note that if you've enabled the vendor portal for your vendor's contact person, he or she will not be able to edit the vendor details like GSTIN number and shipping and billing address in the vendor portal. Now, on the left hand side of the portal, your vendor can access the different transaction modules. They can view their purchase orders from here. They can view all the invoices uploaded or received in the invoice module. They can view the payments received from over here and the statements from here. If your vendor wants to change the password of their organization, they can click on this button. To log out of the vendor portal, click on the logout button. This was a quick overview on the vendor portal. Now, let us dive deeper into the feature and create a transaction in Zoho Books and simultaneously see how those are reflected in the vendor portal. Let us start with the creation of a purchase order. Return to the Zoho Books account and click on Purchase module and then click on the plus button beside the purchase order option. You will now be directed to the purchase order creation page. Select the vendor name from the drop-down menu. As you can see, the GST treatment and the billing details will be automatically populated. Choose if you are going to create the purchase order for an organization or for a customer. Select the address to which the items in the purchase order should be delivered. You can either auto-generate the purchase order number or you can manually enter it. You can configure those settings by clicking on this gear icon. Enter the reference if any. Now enter the date, expected delivery date, and the payment terms. You can also enter the shipment preferences if any. Enter the item details, discounts, and adjustments. If you wish to add the customer note or the terms and conditions, you can add them over here. If you would like to attach any additional files, you can do so by clicking here. Once all these details are filled in, click on Save as Draft to save it as draft and send it later, or click on Save and Send to send the purchase order immediately to the vendor. Please note that only if the status of the purchase order in Zoho Books is marked as sent, then only the transaction will be reflected in the vendor portal. If the status of any of your transaction is in draft, the details will not be reflected in the vendor portal. Now let us go back to the vendor portal and see what happens when you create a purchase order in Zoho Books. In the vendor portal, your vendor will receive the purchase order details instantly. Your vendor can view the details of the transaction by clicking on it. Let's say your vendor goes through the details and wants to give you an additional discount of 20%. In this case, your vendor can add a comment regarding the discount over here. As soon as this is done, in your Zoho Books organization, you will receive two notifications. One notification will notify you that your vendor has viewed the purchase order, and the other notification will be regarding the comment that was added by your vendor. Let's click on the first notification and see what happens. You will now be directed to the view where the comment and the history with respect to the purchase order can be seen. You can edit the purchase order details and add a follow-up comment on the purchase order. To make sure that the comment is seen by the vendor in the vendor portal, check this Display on the portal box option. If you wish to add a comment only for your team members, simply enter the details and uncheck the box and click on Comment. Now, once the comment is added into the Zoho Books, let us return to the vendor portal and see how the changes are reflected over there. As you can see, the amount against the purchase order has been changed and there is a red dot against the purchase order. This appears in the vendor portal whenever you drop a comment against a transaction. Over here, you can also view the status of the transaction. These notifications keep everyone updated and makes collaboration and communication easier. After confirming all the details from your vendor, you can easily convert a purchase order to a bill in Zoho Books by clicking on this button. As soon as you convert the purchase order to bill in Zoho Books, the status of the purchase order will be changed to billed and a new transaction will be added under the invoice section in the vendor portal. Gradually, as the number of transactions increases, your vendor can also filter out transactions based on their status from the drop-down menu. This brings us to the next section, that is the invoice module in the vendor portal. Whenever a purchase order is converted to a bill or a bill is created in Zoho Books, the details of the bill will be automatically updated in the invoice section of the vendor portal. Here, I will quickly create a bill in Zoho Books and show you how the details are reflected in the vendor portal. So, as soon as you create a bill in your Zoho Books module, an invoice will be instantly created in the vendor portal with the relevant status. The user interface of this module and the options available over here are similar to that of the purchase order in the vendor portal. Now, if you have enabled the Allow Vendors to Upload Documents option under the Preferences in Zoho Books, then the vendor portal will have a separate section called Upload Documents. Here, your vendors can upload their invoices and other documents, and these documents or transactions will be added in the Documents module of your Zoho Books. Let's try to upload a document and see how it works. To upload a document in the portal, your vendor should download or print and take a picture of the transaction document. Your vendor can drag and drop or upload documents from the computer. The document will be in the pending state as soon as it is uploaded. If your vendor wants to add a comment related to the document, they can do so by clicking on this blue icon. Now, let's go back to the Zoho Books organization and see what happens when your vendor uploads a document through the vendor portal. As soon as your vendor uploads the document, an in-app notification will appear in your Zoho Books organization. If you click on it, you will be directed to the Documents section. On the document, you can see the date and time of upload and the details of whom and from where the documents were uploaded. You can click on the document to view it. Again, similar to the transactions, you can add a comment over here to start a discussion with your vendors or your team members on the transaction. If the details of the uploaded document are acceptable, then you can instantly convert the document to a bill by clicking on Convert to Bill button. If not, you can also reject the bill. You can also download the transaction. The option to delete the transaction is available only for the admins. Here, I am going to click on Convert to Bill. Once you click on it, vendor details will automatically be populated. fill in the remaining details and then click on Save as Draft to save the bill as draft or click on Save as Open. Now, when you go back to the Bills section of Zoho Books, you will be able to see a new bill along with the uploaded document attached for the reference. Now, let's go back to the vendor portal. In the vendor portal, the status of the uploaded document will be changed from pending to accepted, and a transaction will also be added under the invoice section. Once the goods and services are delivered to you, the next thing to do is pay your vendors. Zoho Books has partnered with ICICI Bank, Standard Chartered, and Yes Bank, which lets you simplify time-consuming banking activities such as vendor payments. I will share a couple of links with you that will give you a detailed explanation on how you can connect your Zoho Books account with these banks. For this webinar, I will demonstrate how you can make vendor payments from within Zoho Books with the help of ICICI Bank integration. Here, I have already linked my ICICI Bank account to Zoho Books. If you would like to know more on it, you can refer to the links that I have shared in the chat screen. Once the integration is set up, you can add the bank account details of the vendor. Go to the vendor module and select the vendor. Now, click on the More option and select Bank Account. Enter the vendor's bank details and click on Save. Now, to make the vendor payment from within Zoho Books, select the bill for which you would like to make the payment. On the top right corner of the screen, you will see an option of Pay via ICICI Bank. As soon as you click on it, a pop-up box will appear. Enter the amount to be paid. As you can see over here, we've got the amount and the bill number details. Select the From account and To account and then select the transaction type. Once all this is done, click on Proceed, and in the screen that follows, enter the one-time password which would be sent to your registered mobile number. Click Submit to make your payment. The status of your payment will be either cleared or uncleared in the Payments Made tab based on the transaction type and the approval workflow you have chosen. A transaction is in the cleared status when the payment has been initiated from the account. A transaction is in the uncleared status when the payment is yet to be initiated to the vendor's account. A few reasons for this include the transaction type chosen or the checker not approving the transaction from the CIB portal. Alternatively, you can also make the vendor payment manually. To do so, go to the Payments Made module and click on the Plus New button. Now, enter all the necessary details from the screen and click on Save. Once the payment has been made to the vendor, the status of the invoice will be changed to Paid in the vendor portal. The vendor can keep track of all the payments that he or she has received from you through the Payments Received module. The vendor can view the statement of account by going to the Statement module. They can also generate statements for a particular period by selecting the date range from here. They can also download or print the statements. As I had mentioned earlier, vendor credits that are added in your Zoho Books organization can be viewed by the vendors in the credit section of the vendor portal. Vendor credits are credits that you receive from your vendor as an equivalent of the amount that they owe you. Since we haven't added any vendor credits in our Zoho Books account, the amount shown over here is 0. Let us try to create a vendor credit in Zoho Books and see how the details get reflected in the vendor portal. Go back to your Zoho Books account and click on Vendor Credits. Now, click on the Plus New button on the top right corner of the page. Fill in the required details and click on Save. Once you create a vendor credit in Zoho Books organization, the available credit details will be shown over here. The available credit section in the dashboard also shows the excess vendor payment amount. This will allow your vendor to keep track of the money that he or she owes you. The vendor credits that you have created in your Zoho Books organization can be applied to any future transaction. Once you apply that, the amount will be updated in the vendor portal as well. Now, let's move on to the next section and have a quick glance on the new features that we'll be adding into the vendor portal in the future. Accepting and converting purchase orders. Once the purchase order is raised from the Zoho Books account, the vendor from the vendor portal can either accept or reject the purchase order. If all the details of the purchase order are correct, the vendor can also convert the purchase order to an invoice, which will be reflected as a bill in the Zoho Books account. The vendor can update the item details like SKU, selling price, stock, and quantity directly from the vendor portal. So this was all about the vendor portal. Now, let us take a quick recap of the session. First, we discussed what is vendor portal and why it is important. Then, we saw how to set up the preferences for vendor portal and learned how to enable the vendor portal for a vendor and its contact person. Then, we saw how different transactions created in Zoho Books are reflected inside the vendor portal. After this, we went straight into the products and learnt about its functionalities. And now, it is time for the live question and answer session. If you have any queries regarding the vendor portal feature, please drop the question in the question tab and our product experts will have those answered for you.